Curator here at the museum. I had the pleasure of working with the George D. Green Art Institute to put together this exhibition, and the pleasure of working with 43 artists and the family members and galleries of 2 artists who had passed away recently to plan this exhibition. So we're so excited to have this work on view and for the museum to be the home for all these artworks through May 12th. So please come back for future programs and gallery talks. And come back with friends and family, because there's a lot to look at in the show, and it definitely benefits from repeat visits to look more closely and see things anew each time. That's certainly been the experience for our staff now that all the works are in-house. So today's gallery talk, will be with 4 artists who we invited to speak based on a starting point thematically of their approaches to color and abstraction. That's just the starting point. So we invited them to spend 10 to 15 minutes talking about their work on view, or their larger practice, with time for 1 question per artist as we go through the gallery. But they're certainly free to talk about anything. You can ask them about anything. So we'll have about an hour and 15 minutes for that tour. And then at the end, if you want more time with artists to ask additional questions, please feel free to do that when the official gallery tour has ended. And a lot of our other artists are here too. So as you're going through the gallery at the end of the tour, if you're spending time looking at a work, if you're one of the artists in the show and you see people admiring your work, please introduce yourself and see if they have any questions for you, because we love to see that support with so many of our exhibiting artists here for the program. So we'll start with Carole Hauser's work. I'll watch the clock, and maybe I'll give like a 5-minute warning, or maybe that's time to take a question if you'd like. And then we'll turn and we'll look at Nancy Lindburg's work on that wall. Then we'll go down towards the center of the gallery and look at Sandy Brooke's works. And then we'll end in the back corner, the back wall, with George Green's works. So just so you have a sense of how we'll be moving through the gallery, that's our plan for today. So enough talking from me, and we're so glad that you're all here today, and I'd like to introduce you to Carole to talk about her work. Let's kick off. Thanks.
I'm not used to this. Tell me if I'm hitting that in a nice level. Is that okay? Closer? Oh my. All right, my name is Carole Hauser, and I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about my watercolor traversing the interior. Closer? Oh my. All right. I'm used to lecturing to students, but I'm not used to a microphone. I want to talk in particular about the subject of abstraction and color, but I will inevitably veer off to talking about my method and meaning in my work. Before I go further, though, I'd like to thank the George D. Green Institute for all of their work, for the genesis and execution of this amazing exhibition. Especially, I'd like to thank George Green, Jeri Hise, Susan Trueblood Stuart, and Terry Milton, and of course, Danielle, the McCosh curator of the Jordan Schnitzer Museum. Am I fading in and out? I'm okay. Okay. But back to the painting. I think I'd like to start first of all, and please jump in if you have a question, but I'd like to start first of all about my process. I do not plan my paintings. I make a shape on a white piece of watercolor paper. Some of you may have worked with watercolor and known it can be a tough taskmaster. I paint a shape, I respond to that shape, and then I respond to that shape, and then I start to believe I understand where I'm going with the painting, although I'm not always there. Then I start to adjust and refine, and using the artist toolbox, I try to develop a visual language. And it really is a visual language, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit later. I want to create a visual language. I believe that my paintings, from my point of view, have a particular meaning, but I'm fine with people having other interpretations of what I do. It's not that I'm committing you to what I believe, but I try to work very hard to refine the progress of the painting so that it develops a meaning that is readable. And in this particular painting, we sort of move from areas of calm and harmony to areas of cacophonous disarray. Things are not settled, right? Things are almost, I would say almost a Mahler symphony. You know, things are clashing, things are abrupt, and unsettled looking. And that particularly is intentional. I want these paintings to have meaning. And in this particular painting, we could be talking, when I say traversing the interior, about the inner self, the inner psychology, how things are not settled, how things are constantly fighting with one another, from, as I said, sort of harmony and a relationship to crashing symbol-like shapes that are fighting with one another. And I think that is something of the inner psychology. I think even those who meditate say that, you know, to meditate, you're trying to keep your brain from veering off into all the ways we think, all the conflicts we have in our mind, and try to center ourselves. And so, compositionally and otherwise, even though there's a lot of conflict, I work hard to bring some kind of balance and some kind of stability in a universe that is fairly explosive. Maybe you don't see it that way, but I think of it as fairly explosive in this painting, and this isn't like all of my paintings, but I see it as very explosive. So here we have shapes that are actually somewhat concrete. Abstraction that is an abstraction of a fabric. And we can say, when we go back to the idea of abstraction, that's something of a fabric, that is an abstraction. Whereas here, there's an illusionist movement where that shape is fighting with that kind of a representation. And then there are very flat abstractions, more like abstract expressionist movements. So I feel like I'm hitting on painting a variety of abstractions, and again, choosing to put conflict into my painting and hoping that I can bring it together. And that's the hell of it and the joy of it, is that you put things in motion on a piece of paper, and you do it partly because when you're a painter, most of us do what wakes us up in the morning and makes us excited. And when that painting started to move in that direction of conflict, and I went with it and I thought, how can I resolve this painting? You know, so the abstraction, why I choose abstraction is I believe it has a language that doesn't get confused with representation. All paintings, I consider all paintings abstraction. Anytime you take the three-dimensional world and you put it on a two-dimensional plane, that's a kind of abstraction. There's abstraction of real forms, there's abstract illusionism, abstract expressionism, where you're making movements just for the expressive quality. By the way, we have a master abstract illusionist, George Green. Can't be beat. He's like a man who could pull a rabbit out of a hat and then pull another rabbit out of the hat, and you cannot believe how many ways he plays with you visually, and how lucky we are to have his work to look at today. So that's what why I work with abstraction. That's what I'm doing there. As you can probably tell, I've chosen a palette that's conflicting, not settled. These are intentional. You may say, that's uncomfortable to me. I'm not sure I'm working toward comfortable. and artwork doesn't have to be comfortable. It's really, there are things, there's stabilizing elements, there's something of an X composition. There are very organized, stabilizing things. They're, you know, horizontals and verticals that are trying to stabilize, but the conflict is intentional. So I really would love to answer questions. Any thoughts anybody has? I can answer more than one. Yes.
I too am attracted to this very subtle area because it carries through both in value and in content. This side and this side.
Right, I think that's why I said an X.
Right, and I think that pulls it all together.
Well, thank you.
So it's interesting to me, and then on the other side, it's a real old one, is that I just keep coming back to that, and that's one of the subtle parts.
And yes, why it is good, right? There is sort of an overriding large curve and then smaller curves in here, things pulling you in, things folding back. Perhaps you can tell I have fun painting. I really, as I said, I think I started here and had no idea where I was going. And then as I would build, things would evolve, and I will go back to the whole thing about watercolor. Something that I didn't mention is technically I do a glazing technique where I paint with watercolor, and then when the painting's dry, I rinse it off and I build it up again and I rinse it off. And so it can take me quite a while to develop that level of intensity. It's not easy to get that level of intensity in a watercolor without it being thick, when it retains that translucency. And so that is the product of painting being the mother of invention. I got to the point on some paintings where I just couldn't tolerate what they looked like, and I took them into the shower, and I realized, eureka! I can get rid of all that thick stuff. I can get rid of all that thick stuff and come back and repaint. So some shapes I might paint 10 to 20 times. And that's a whole other problem. Yes? They start with spontaneity and they take a lot of labor. I have to admit that these do not come out of me easily, and I probably spend as much time looking as painting, and I spend a long time painting. And so I don't produce a lot. And as I said, they're not necessarily all pleasing paintings. They have a lot of conflicted stuff going on in them, but they're answering some, maybe they're telling me something about life and about my life, that things are, that the best laid plans, that we cannot, no matter how many ways we try to organize our life, things will happen, energies will come in. And beautiful, beautiful writing, by the way, here. I think Caroline wrote it. She talked about this as being like a cosmology, and I accept that idea too. You know, that this is like a conflicted cosmology, something popping out, growing up out of this energy. Anyhow, yes? Well, it's one of those paintings that I started and had to turn against the wall for a while. So, you know, they're ones that will not resolve easily, but at least 2 months. Yes? Not often. No. Yes?
How do you decide what size you want to work on when you have a process that's more fluid?
I like to work large, which is crazy because of framing costs and storage, but I like to work large. I paint on the floor on my hands and knees. Those of you who do watercolors know watercolor runs, so I'm on my hands and knees and I paint, and it works for me. I don't know if it would work for everybody. Yes?
How did you get the lines to be so sharp and straight and the curves and all that?
It ruined my eyesight. I just have good eye-hand coordination.
You didn't like...
I might have, I drew a line, but then I painted up to it. If you know anything about watercolor, if you overlap, you'll make a double line, you'll make it dark. So if you want to paint up to it, you paint up to it. I've not found a good technique to avoid that. And so it's just a matter of patience.
Yeah, I can appreciate how many, I mean, that red, for instance. I mean, it's really hard to get that to be so opaque, you know, with transparent watercolor. Is that what you work with?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
So it's like 20 layers.
Well, I don't know how many of that, but the darker they are, the more likely. But yes, they're more than one layers there, the one layer there. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. Is that the time up? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carole. And I think, is it fair to say you'll be around at the end of the tour, too, if people want to grab you with questions? And I'm so glad, too, that you mentioned Caroline. So Caroline Phillips, who's here today, Caroline, is our curatorial extern. So she finished her master's at the U of O last year and has been working full-time at the museum this year as curatorial support. And so my name is attached to this project in a lot of very highly visible ways, which doesn't acknowledge all of my co-workers at the museum, everything they did, the equal amount of work they put into making the show happen. And Caroline's a great example of someone who is making us all look good because, yes, let's clap for Caroline to embarrass her. She's a phenomenal writer, and she was in charge of, we had several students who are interns here who worked on label copy for the show and were researching the artists and looking at the artist statements and submitted drafts of labels as a starting point, and Caroline took all of that and helped us edit and fill in with writing labels so that everything in the gallery reads as a cohesive voice, which can be really tricky to achieve with multiple writers and with 60-plus artworks. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for mentioning them. So yeah, so now let's reposition ourselves and we'll look at Nancy's work, and I'll introduce you to Nancy Lindburg here. How are you? I didn't get to say hi when I first came
Do you
in.
think that I should use your... Do you think people can hear me?
I think this helps with the video to have the microphone. It makes a big difference. And a lot of our guests might be hard of hearing too, so this will help them.
And I'm hard of hearing, and I'm worried that I am not going to be able to hear the questions.
Oh, yeah, this piece right here. Well, maybe we can hand people the microphone if they ask a question, and then they can hand it back to you, or I can repeat it. Yeah, let's do that. And it's best to hold it like an ice cream cone, like as close to your mouth, and you turn with it. And then the sound quality is better. Yeah. Do you need a chair or anything? This will be need a chair, or do you want to stand?
Oh, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And as you're getting set up too, I'll just make a reminder just to, if you could give a couple of inches to any of the walls or artwork, that will help a lot, because sometimes even if our security monitors, even if you know you're not touching a wall, they can't tell if you aren't because of the crowd of people. So it helps if we just are all able to kind of give those walls and work some space. We appreciate that. And Nancy is going to tell us about her work, and I'll just give you a sign when we're getting close to question times. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm not very good at handling this. Can you hear me? No. Okay. Well.
Closer the better.
Okay. Closer. Okay. Well, Carole is a hard act to follow, I must say. But first, I too have to thank Danielle and Jill Hart and the University of Oregon and the very smart people who did the labels on each painting. It's just astonishing to me, the thoughtfulness and the knowledge that one can find in those. So color in abstraction, color has always been very important to me. The lushness of color, the vibrancy of color, just the richness, and the richness of surface, the surface quality. this is called Still Life in Flux. And flux to me is means life. It's the same as life, change and flux. And what's important to me also are ideas. For me, painting is an accumulation of ideas. And oftentimes, when you're painting, your ideas are ahead of your understanding. Have you discovered that? That you really don't quite know what you're doing until months or years after the piece is done. Then you understand what you've done. I'm always interested in the underwear of painting, the composition, the line, the shapes, how they move around. I'm going to use my right hand, but then you can't see. Okay. This still life was something in my imagination. Everybody who does still lifes knows that there's kind of a table, and there are objects on the table, and then there's a foreground or a background. And so this is my idea of a still life. What more to say? Abstraction. Abstraction for me is to simplify something, to bring order to something. So in that simplification, you're working again with shapes and colors, line, rhythm, to create some kind of a meaningful composition. I guess I've said what I need to say about the painting. Yeah.
What I'm struck by your painting here is the liveliness and motion that the white, that high contrast brings, and then the insinuation of some forms that are organic, like the leaf, just suggestive here and there of a still life. But as you disassemble it, it becomes this other composition, this other idea, this other collection of colors and shapes.
Thank you.
So contrast.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm struck with your brilliance of the space. And the way you've used your cool colors in the back, and your most foreground shapes are in fact the warmest colors and the colors of the greatest intensity. But you have woven, it's interesting because even on this orange foreground piece, you've let this kind of maroon shade overlap so that you're constantly playing with what's advancing and what's receding. And I think that was one of the most interesting ideas that Hoffman had, about constantly suggesting something and then contradicting it in space. I think it's really brilliant split spatial.
Thank you.
Yes.
I was going to ask you, what time period did you paint this? What year did you paint this?
Pardon?
What year did you paint the painting?
Well, let's see,
2014.
2014, but this piece it took several years to paint because I'm often interrupted in what I do, like many people. And so I have to let it set somewhere, and then I go back to it. And that's probably why there is layers upon layers of pigment. and I could adjust and manipulate the pigment.
That's why I asked, because I thought you painted this much earlier, maybe like in the 50s or 60s, when there was a lot of body attitude paintings, and maybe you were influenced by the Fluxus movement.
Yes, yes. Yeah,
Where did you start this painting?
well, probably in around 2010 or 12.
No, I mean, where on the canvas did you start?
Oh, gosh. Well, that's a question.
With an underpainting?
That's a good question, but I don't know where I started. I probably...
Will you move the mic a little bit?
Uh-huh.
Thank you.
I probably organized the largest shapes first and then worked with the smaller. Again, I'm thinking of a traditional still life, you know, with...
You start with like the table and go from there.
Well, I think the table probably is the last thing I worked with. But of course, you know, when you're painting, you're kind of thinking about all the areas at one time. And especially with color, when you're putting color down. I like to do this. I like your eye to circulate along the canvas. So that makes it fun to be dealing with the underwear painting all the time.
Is this oil?
Oh yeah. I've never graduated to acrylic, and I should do that, but somebody who is a Paleolithic person like I am, you just can't change.
Did you start with an underpainting, the whole thing, an underpainting?
Excuse me?
Did you start with like a underpainting? Did you start your pencil, you put one color down and then build on top of it?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I have to say that the problems that this generated for me were hard to solve. And that's, if you feel like I do, that art is about ideas, it's also about trying to solve the problems that you create for yourself. And it's kind of like music with resolutions from the dissonance that you create. So.
You mentioned that you think in terms of simplification when you're dealing with abstraction. I'm wondering, have you always worked with abstraction, or have you also, or did you at other times do more traditional still?
Well, in my many years of painting, I've done figurative work, of course, and I've done very understandably visual still lifes and landscapes and what have you. So it's just kind of a matter of what you feel you need to do at a particular time. You need to do something. I needed to do a still life, and so I created my own still life for myself. Just lots of fun. I'm grateful for all of you here listening to some of us and learning from this magnificent exhibit. It's just one of the finest I've ever been a part of. And I'm grateful to the university and to George and Jeri and for their hard work for years, many years. So.
Thank you so much. much, Nancy. So now we can move down to the blue freestanding wall to look at the two paintings by Sandy Brooke, and she'll tell us about her work.
Nancy, where did you get your scar? Where did you get your scar?
Somebody asks you a question, just to make sure you can hear well, and to remind the other speakers that usually people can figure out the question by the answer, but that would be helpful to do. Yeah, if you were
All right, thank you. We're making our way through our wonderful tour. So Sandy Brooke will speak next, and then when she's done talking about her work, we'll talk about George's work, so you might not have to move too far after she speaks, but I'll go ahead and, without taking up too much more time, introduce Sandy Brooke to you. So thank you so much, Sandy, for being here.
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you to Danielle and all the staff at the museum for putting this together in a marvelous manner. Thank you to Jeri and George. It's really a nice event that you put together. And thank all of you for coming. I have to apologize that I'm going to use a few notes because I'm not as brave as the other two before me, and I forget things. Abstraction and color are a great combination to talk about. Strange as it sounds, abstraction came out of realism. In 1877, Paul Cézanne, working in Aix-en-Provence in the south of France, changed painting, leaving the traditional approach from the Renaissance behind. In his still life with Open Drawer, and I didn't realize there'd be so many of you, but I made a couple prints, we can pass them around. I wanted you to be able to see what I'm going to talk about. So just, you can just, and I have a couple more so it'll go. So in this still life with Open Drawer, he used a faceted stroke, not a smooth or blended brush stroke, but a scrubbed stroke. He placed brush strokes side by side. He stopped shading forms, and orange fruit has a red side, not a darkened orange value to change the plane. He then placed it next to a green fruit, using complementary colors to change the space and composition. Perspective is no longer important to Cézanne. If you look at the dish that's in that painting, you'll notice that on one side it has the correct ellipse going out, and the other side he has crushed it up like this. And then there's no back to the dish. So he begins to do little things like that that, because the painting is so beautiful, you don't really look at it closely. You think, oh, what a gorgeous painting. But actually, he's really messing with you. So then in that, there's two vessels in that, and if you look at the top of them, you'll notice neither are correct in perspective. So I have a second one. This still life with pomegranate and pears on a plate is amazing. We won't do this the whole time, just a couple times. Okay. Send that. I only have a few. So if you look at this pear, the pear is virtually floating. He didn't complete the form. The brush stroke across the top is green, and it just goes right into the back of the painting. Then if we move on from his still lifes into what he did with landscape, his landscape of Mount Sainte-Victoire in 1888 also is interesting because, let me go back here. In this landscape, you see Mount Sainte-Victoire, and you see the beautiful pinks, purples, and blues across the mountain, and then you look at the town in the front, and it's not drawn. The buildings are not outlined. They are just little brush strokes of color distributed across the canvas. Now, a better example of his landscapes, and shows this brushstroke I'm talking about, and the way he's starting to tear up the surface of the painting and take these brushstrokes, stretch them out, and the way he's using color is in this one. This is called A House in Provence. And this is really a beautiful painting. It's just really gorgeous. But it is not in the tradition of landscape as we've known it to this point. And so you've got these yellow buildings are shaded with blue, and the brushstrokes go from blue through orange and ochre to green. And then by 1900, he has totally loosened up painting to be without outline, shading, and perspective, but he kept color and line and choosing the space of painting outside the tradition of painting. So when he goes further into landscape, it looks like this. This is where he gets he focuses right in on the trees and the green, but there is the only shape you have is just couple lines for the tree. And then, Okay, I'm almost done with handouts. No, I'm okay. I'll just let him fall around and stuff. I'll get Beverly to help me. Okay, when he finally gets to 1900, he's finally achieved the ultimate for Cezanne. It is all gone. There are just brushstrokes. There is just paint. There are just colors. And that's, I'm sorry about that. You can grab that. And so now Cezanne has changed painting forever. A overview of nature and the tradition of painting is gone, and it announces that Paul Cezanne is the father of modern painting. And this is in 1900. So we move on. Both Picasso and Brooke knew of Cezanne's work and were influenced, and they formed Cubism out of what he did. William de Kooning, who most of you know as one of our most famous abstract expressionists, knew Cezanne's work. De Kooning was trained in Holland at a very traditional art academy. He began his art career painting perfectly rendered still lifes, drawings, and drawing the figure. Most abstract painters in the 30s started their careers painting realistically. It was Picasso's Guernica that came to the Museum of Modern Art in 1939 that pushed American painters towards abstraction. All the New York painters went to see it. They were stunned and excited. One of the painters that had come across earlier was Arshile Gorky, and he had been watching the European painters for a few years, reading the magazines coming across the Atlantic from France and Germany into New York. He saw the changes in painting by Picasso and the others. And then in the 30s, Hitler did it. He drove all the contemporary-minded artists out of Europe into New York. With the influx of these artists, the quality of thinking in New York was incredible. Hans Hofmann came from the Bauhaus, Marcel Duchamp, and the American artist Man Ray from Paris, plus the writer André Breton, and many more artists who were painting in new abstract style. Now, add that Dr. Suzuki, a Zen Buddhist, arrived in New York to share a new way of thinking about reality. He gave lectures on Buddhism, and all the artists in the New York school attended. Abstract thinking moved the dial in painting towards color. The space of painting changed. Painters now used letters, lines, marks, and numbers instead of figures, apples, and plants. The new thinking was the most important element in painting. My painting has been informed by all these artists, both European and American. These two paintings are mine. They are very different, both in color, idea, and pictorial space. When I painted, this is Fish at the Door. I was working towards white, using a palette of about 10 colors. I began with the following colors at full strength: Indian yellow, orange, vermilion, geranium lake, Bernard blue, and alizarin crimson. Then those I used for an underpainting. The first layer of the painting is important to my process as I have no plan when I begin. I put paint on, placing it across the canvases where I think it should go. I'm not just throwing paint around, I have a direction. My focus for the last couple years has been the demise and melting of the Arctic. My thinking about the Arctic guides the placement of paint on the canvas. The abstract expressionist painter, Milton Resnick, once said of painting, the first 5 minutes are the best. After that, you got problems. And he was referring to the beginning of a painting when you don't need to think, only act. You paint without fear. Abstraction liberates you from decisions about imagery. You no longer think of a painting as foreground and background, placement of the objects, or a horizon. There's only space and ground. And I would say that I am more attached to the process than the conclusion. As I followed the melting of the Arctic, both online and in books and in newspapers, I was looking at huge floating ice sculptures breaking away and moving towards the Atlantic. White on blue, and then intense reds, yellows, and pinks, all reflected on the water and the ice. The next layer of my painting is the addition of marks, lines of graphite, loosely drawn.
These are the underpainting. These are done with graphite or maybe sometimes a little charcoal, usually the graphite, and they're all under the paint.
Creating an element of line against the color. It's like a calligraphy of motion, like words you can't read. Following the marks, I begin to paint over the underpainting using 1 of 3 whites. I like zinc white. Zinc is white used in making flesh tone. It's very translucent. I'm also fond of Krementz white, which is lead white, and it has a silver appearance. I also might use a pale ochre as it's an off-white. It's my intention for the underpainting to show through the layers, and that's what you see here.
These are places. This is the Indian yellow coming through, and here's the geranium lake coming through. And this down here was
Bonnard blue and alizarin crimson, making kind of a purple. But when the oil paints mix a little bit with the graphite, they get a little dirty. So the purple isn't really a nice, clean, sweet purple. It's kind of a little murky. And here one of the lines comes out because it didn't get buried under the paint. Okay. The marks now on top of the painting I made with oil stick. I made titanium white oil stick. Let's see over in here. This is actually paint. These are brushed lines, brushed on over the surface. Oil sticks are a nice change from the brush. I feel oil sticks give you a certain freedom in making lines. If you don't like what you drew, you just take a cloth and wipe it off, or a rag. It's gone, and you can start all over. So it's very freeing. You know, you can't make a mistake. I want the painting to be translucent. Oil paint is very transparent. So to increase the transparency, I use Gamblin's Neo-Megalith Medium. I build my paintings up in layers of colors, marks, and painting strokes. Every decision is made during the painting. Each decision influences the next. There's no original plan, no drawing. I decide where to go and what to add by what I see is happening as I paint. If I put color on and it doesn't feel right, I wipe it off. The process of wiping off is a very positive technique for painting, but it drove my students crazy at times. Decisions in painting are hard, but after painting for 50 years, I know how to choose my direction. Painting teaches painting. I believe everyone has an inherent sense of space. You are born with it. My granddaughter at 3 confirmed that for me. We set up to paint one afternoon with praying watercolors, brushes, paper, and water. And I said, okay, Sid, just take the brush out of the water and put it in the paint and put it on the paper. She said, okay. And so then she'd start painting, and she would be putting these colors together that I thought were just gorgeous. And I would say, wow, that looks really good. She said, it's not done. I'm like, okay, okay. And then she would then take another piece of paper and she would maybe put 6 strokes on it, and she would go, done. And I'm like, don't you want to do a little bit more? No, it's done. I'm like, okay. She made 54 paintings that day. And my husband can confirm that because he came home and they were all over the house, everywhere. My other painting, this is the Alaska Arctic. This came from reading the newspaper one morning that the Trump administration had decided to drill in the Arctic. Okay. So I couldn't believe it. Drilling would destroy the habitat and the breeding grounds of the caribou and the quality of the water the whales and seals live in. Thankfully, oil prices are down, and it's very expensive to drill in the Arctic. But the thought that anyone would consider to further destroy the Arctic region was upsetting. So I started this painting, and again, I started with those colors, the Indian yellow, the vermilion, the Bonnard blue. Then instead of working to white, I took quinacridone gold and diluted it with medium, and I brushed these uneven dark lines across the surface. So, and then I came back with white. Then I came back with zinc, and I pushed it against, and I came back with cremettes and pushed it, and then it came over it, over this. I brought the white over. Now remember, zinc is very transparent and translucent, so you can bring it over something like quinacridone gold and let it run down and go over, and you can still see the two areas. This part more a little clearer, this one not so clear. The other thing I did was I started scraping. So once they were on there, I took like regular scraper that you do wall scraping with when you're puttying a wall, and I just scraped through the color and I brought it down. I brought it here. There's a few other places. I'm not sure if I did it over here or not. Well, you'll see them. They're there, and the runs. So I also carved lines. And I didn't do as much underwork with this one, but I did carving of lines on the top here and here, and you can see, now you see the underpainting. I intend for the underpainting at some place to come through and show through the top white layer. And in this one, the underpainting came through a lot stronger. This painting, these two talk about the Arctic in very different ways. And the I do paint in series. This one was done probably, I don't know, 10 months before that one was done. But when I do paint in series, I don't make the same painting over and over. It's just my nature to change a painting. Like every 4 paintings, I have to do something else. I have to change the color. I have to change the format. I can't make the same painting. And so I feel I've been very lucky to live my life as an artist, stay alive, and committed. Thank you. Sorry about the handouts. I just didn't know how to talk about it without you guys looking at it a little bit, seeing, because many of you have seen his work, and so you know. Well, do you guys have any questions? Yeah. Big influence. When I started painting, and Ken Paul is here today, so he knows this. The University of Oregon was into minimalism, and it was Frank Stella. And then I learned about William de Kooning and Milton Resnick, and I switched to a more gestural painting, but it was pretty hard edge to start.
Because I'm thinking of Joan Snyder
Oh, I love Joan Snyder.
and also
Helen Frankenthaler.
Ellen Frankenthaler's great. And there's a Joan Mitchell in the other room, and she's just fantastic, yeah. And also I have a friend, Pat Pasloff, who was a painter. And
I've met her.
yeah, she's wonderful. She's gone now, but she's wonderful, yeah.
She was married to Milton.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And by the way, for those of you that are going to New York, the Milton Resnick and Pat Pasloff Foundation is now open on Forsyth Street in Milton's old studio. They completely remodeled it. It's a beautiful gallery, and they have Milton and Pat's work there, and they are going to do rotating shows also. And so if you're in New York, I really advise you to go see it. It's really wonderful. 80th and Forsyth. It's down in Chinatown. So let's see, what's it off of the street? 80th. So Pat was on. No, Eldridge. I'm sorry, 87 Eldridge, because Pat was on Forsyth, and then one block over is Eldridge, and Eldridge runs right off the street that runs right through Chinatown, which I have forgotten the name of. What is it? Grant. Okay. You're welcome. Is there another question? Okay. You guys all good? Okay, we're gonna. Oh wait. What?
Do you have any, is the size random, or do you spend time deciding what size painting you paint?
The size of the painting? Yeah, well, you know, I wanted to paint larger than I was. And the reality of living in Bend, Oregon and painting a 60-inch painting is ridiculous. You can't afford to ship them. It's so expensive. So I came up with doing the diptych. So these are 30 by 40, and then you shove them right together, and a friend of mine created a little system in the back with eye hooks that you rubber band together so you can literally get them as tight as possible. But you can take them apart and put them in a box that ships a lot easier. So in order to get to paint big, it was cost effective, and I mean, because a lot of times you don't even get to show them, you know. People can't. Very few venues have, a lot of galleries aren't big enough, you know, so I was lucky. Thanks. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right, so now we'll get to hear from George Green. And George, do you plan to move us down to the corner while you talk too, or we'll see what happens? I think we'll start wherever you'd like to start. I think this works well. Right, so you may already know George Green or know of George Green. And if not, though, what a treat that we've gotten to work with him and work with members of his institute over the last several years, actually, from the beginning when they pitched the idea for the exhibition to the museum, and all the great conversations and work together since. So I'm so happy to have been able to get to know you and your work so well over the last several years, and now we're so excited to hear from you.
First thing you all should know, this is an unusual person. You do not find curators like Danielle. I've been in zillions of shows all over the place. You don't find curators like this. Special deal. Very special deal. Okay, one thing, you're looking around, something's going to be really, really obvious, and that's they're all paintings, right? There's a reason for that. Paintings are intrinsically more powerful, more interesting, and more important than sculpture. Oh, I have friends who are sculptors, and many of them are better artists than I. Michelangelo may have been a better sculptor than he was a painter, but well, we'll argue about that over a beer sometime. But well, here's the reason for that. Most of you, if you were to pass through these galleries alone, without people talking, without things going on, there would be a sense, impossible to describe, kind of a buzz, and you wonder, what the heck's going on? Well, what's going on is we, you, whomever it is going back to the very, very beginnings of being a human being. That's a long time. Now let's stop for a minute. What's the most interesting idea there is? I'll tell you. It's the idea of something from nothing. Think about that, how that will twist your mind for a while. Then after you've thought about that long enough to keep you awake for a while, that's actually what's believed. That's what's going down as far as our scientific community is concerned. So here we have something from nothing. The universe comes from nothing. So why is a painting intrinsically more interesting than a sculpture? Let's forget about aesthetics. We're not talking about aesthetics. What looks good, what doesn't look good. We're talking about the possibility. You're making a sculpture. You got stuff. It starts out with stuff. Clay, wood, marble, metal, whatever it is. And you move that stuff around. You reposition it. You change it. And you might end up with something that's absolutely terrific. Grand. But you made something from something. That's not so magical. When we use the term visual magic, we're not talking metaphorically. We're talking about something that really is so. Visual magic. You make a painting starts out as nothing. Absolutely nothing. And depending upon what you do, it becomes something. That's a pretty big deal. You think about that for a while, and you start shaking. And that's one of the things why when you go around to a group of paintings, there's an experience you will have that you will never, ever be able to describe. But you can have that experience. Now, we're looking at pictures, and that happens a lot. Something happens, you can't describe it, you can't tell someone about it, you can't explain it, but by God, it happens. And someone else can have that experience. That's what we're all about. Another thing, when you look at all these paintings, what else do you notice about them? Every, by God, one of them is handmade. There is little, if any, use of technology. And look at the age we're in now. But yet, all of these are handmade. That's also a big deal because that goes clear back to our prehistoric roots when spirit, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, teamed up, manifested itself in matter. That's us. You know, flesh and blood deals, except we're spirit, we're consciousness, however you want to mix that one up. But if we go clear back to those really, really, really far long ago deals, it will weird you out. Because what likely happened? We're showing up, and here we are, flesh and blood deals. We can't talk, we can't communicate in any way. We're brand new. But we communicate, right? We have this urge to communicate, an urge for expression in some way. Almost for certain. First thing we do is something like that. And we make a mark. And that mark might be made on a wall, on a rock, on some deal, but a mark has been made. Drawing is starting. Now, let's imagine, let's do a little thought experiment here. Many people, I'm sure all of you know some people who are really, really, really dull. They may be smart, they may be nice, but they are, by God, dull people. But the one thing that they have in common, almost all of them will be found doodling from time to time, picking up a pen, a pencil, something, making marks on a paper. What are they doing? They're going back to their beginning without realizing it, without knowing it. We're hardwired for that. So here we are in a place, handmade things, somethings from nothing. That in itself is enough to get your goat, but then you start looking around and some of these are really neat. Many of them are really neat. And, you know, they vibrate on their own. So, visual magic, it's a real deal. It's not a metaphor. All right, I'll talk personally now about my version. What's up with me about this? Talk about this big picture first. Generally speaking, I'm not someone who plans things. I don't pre-organize things. Sometimes, in the past and sometimes in the present, I will make a preliminary drawing for something. But I never, ever consider myself at work until I have violated that preliminary drawing. I see drawing simply as an inertia-changing device. You will notice that this is something that goes on with all of us. Any of you who have taught beginning painting for one thing, and you give a class the problem, do whatever you want. The result of that will be, there won't be anything done. Students need some kind of deal to get going. And you will also remember this, if you think back on yourself, your own activities, you'll know that the ideas that spring into your head almost always spring into your head when you're doing something else, when you're already moving in some direction. You got things going. You're in flow. All things happen. This is why it is so damned phony, to me, personal opinion, the idea of writer's block. What the hell is that? I mean, think about that for a minute. Get doing something. move around, write this, write this, write this. Do you ever hear about painter's block? Well, there's no such thing of that either. You might go through a period where you're doing crappy work, but you're doing it. That's the whole business with that. All right, so I'm not making plans. I'm doing stuff, putting something down. And many of the people who have spoken share that with me in their own way. The plan, not so important. We're just doing things. So I'll put things down, and as you can see, there's a whole bunch of different stuff going on here. The idea of harmony, it's an old-fashioned, energy-depleting idea. It's an interior decorator's idea. It ought to be put out to pasture, and you must never think of it. So, no such thing as harmony anymore. But what we are interested in is visual energy. The way when something butts up against something else, things start to spark. They start moving around. We want to have something that's every bit as alive and present as we are. Not just something that's a representation of something else. We want it to be something. We want it to start shaking, and we want it to participate in the world same as we do. So we've got different things coming together. When different things come together, they make a third thing. We don't know what that third thing is, but we can see it and we can experience it, and it's almost always something causing energy. Edges, lines. You go from this area to that area. Different things. That transition point where one thing moves into another is an area of high energy. We're attracted to that. Now, another thing, you look at this picture, you'll see some things that are very, very formal, very realistic, like carved wood. The balls and, well, these, what do you call them, cubes? Yeah, those things. Different geometric forms. And then what happens? We've got this fat paint moved quickly. When I'm doing this, watch me. That's exactly what happens here. Exactly that speed, except my hand is holding a loaded brush. Now here's the neat part of this. I don't make a judgment. Zero judgments. If you make judgments while you're working, you have, this is sort of a metaphor, but maybe not. You are admitting the devil into your process. You are causing doubt to happen. Once doubt happens, you're finished. You're just a craftsman of a crappy order. So, got to forget that one. All of this brushing around activity, this and that, I don't even decide much except a color. I've got this yellow color in there. I'll load up a brush, thick paint, so on, and I will approach the painting. This is not cornball. I will approach the painting and almost back into it, whirl around and do something so fast and so violently that I don't have an opportunity to make a judgment, to do it right. Later on, you live with the result. You gotta live with the result. Otherwise, you're a phony. And your pictures become phony. And they become mannered and such as that. Well, one of the results of this painterly gestures and so on is that it moves, to me, it jumps this other stuff along. It causes it to move. Something that ordinarily wouldn't be in motion. Pretty soon, you've got this whole painting vibrating and jumping and moving along. Next thing. If you get up close and you look at this picture, you'll see these little teeny gold lines. Can you see them from where you are? Yeah. If I were sitting where you are sitting, I couldn't see them. That's why I'm asking. When you get older, your eyes go. So, but if you see them, those things take forever. They take forever to do. And while they look like they're formal, that they're somewhat planned, that they're somewhat organized. They are not. A line goes up, and it may be a gestural line, and then another one, and then another one. It's quite a while. Geez, have I been talking too low? How's this? This sounds like being a bully. I mean, nobody talks this loud. Jeez. Tone things down here, Bob. Anyhow, those lines, as I say, they are not planned, they're not organized, but they take forever to do. We're talking about months of this. And that process is, I've had people, doing little movies and this and that say, well, can we watch you paint? Well, yeah, if you're going to bore yourself to death for a day watching somebody do this, it's ridiculous. But it has to be done. And you lose yourself in the process. It's a feedback. I can hear myself. That's what I sound like to you guys, right? Wow. That's very strange. Very strange. Okay. Pardon? You sound good. You're very generous. I'm glad you're in the front row here. So, well, before we get into questions, let me go through the process of, let's say, evolution, that's generous, of development, how I go from one thing to another, from one painting to another painting. I'm going to be very, very severe about this. I don't have ideas. I don't think things up. That's pretty severe. You can argue with me about that, and I'll probably have to say, yeah, I shouldn't have been so bold about that. But that's basically it. I don't think things up. I do things, and I permit things to occur. That's a big difference. Thinking something up and causing it to happen, or permitting it to occur. Think about the difference. I'm a big one for the permitting something to happen, because when you do that, you have engaged your unconscious. You aren't thinking, you're doing. And any thinking that occurs will happen after the fact. There's a lot more that can happen with your unconscious. For example, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but if I think things up, I have a plan of some kind, I cause something to happen, I'm only as good as my own smartness. And as I'm telling you, a lot of people in here are smarter than I. But if I function at an intuitive level, stuff will happen and I will jump over my intellect. I will do things that I couldn't have imagined. And that's what's really cool. That's quite a deal. Change happens with me frequently as a consequence of doing something poorly, an error of some kind, such as an error can be within the context of how I'm painting, or something slops down this way or that. I don't correct errors. I don't dress paintings up. I don't polish them up. If they're crappy looking, if there's a flaw in it, it stays. And it stays for two reasons. One is, if a painting isn't good enough to stand up to a flaw, it's no damn good. And I tend to use these so-called flaws as though they're mutations. And if you leave them, they might be selected for. If you get rid of them, you stay in the same place. So let's think about these paintings evolving on the model of a biological evolution of punctuated equilibrium. The Niles Eldridge, Stephen Jay Gould model, in which not much has happened, and then bam, there's something will happen. Then then something will happen. That's the way these paintings happen for me. If you were to see 100 pictures between one of my paintings and another, you would see a change. If you were to look at all 100 pictures, picture, 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 you would not see a change. That's what's kind of cool. And no judgments are made about this. Now, are you believing me yet? A little bit? Or is it just a bunch of BS? Let's be honest. Okay, so anyhow, think about these pictures down there. That's one picture. In fact, you want to scoot down, or is that too hard to do? So I can talk from any place, but what do you folks think? You want to go down there? Thank you. I appreciate the offer. Before you take off, it's probably worth your while to put your nose on the picture. So go right up to it and gently touch it.
But we're not allowed to.
Well, you are for just now. No. Okay, okay.
I'm no fun.
Well, imagine that you're touching it. In fact, that's one of the deals about visual energy. You want to look at something and you want to be compelled to touch it at the same time you're forbidden to do so. There's a lot of energy in that. Everyone gets to be a teenage boy again and remember what that's like. Okay, these pictures evolved by the method that I'm telling you about from robust, exuberant pictures that were fat paint going every which way. Abstract illusionism. When I was one of 3 people who invented that. And when I was first doing that, it was big, fat paint, this thick, going this way. But then in illusionistic space, that was believable. You go back to those pictures, we're going to go back to the late 70s, sorry. And go from that period clear up to now, clear up to here, and see all the hundreds of pictures that were done. And the same thing, you'll notice, picture to picture to picture, no change. Big hops, you'll notice the change. But the very idea that you could get from those pictures I'm describing to this, nobody will believe that. No reasonable person would believe that unless you're a painter who follows that idea. And you can see how variety can occur, and it can occur in advance of your ability to recognize it or to do anything about it. So now you look at this and it looks sort of like a photograph. Am I right or wrong about that? And that looks like a real frame. Okay, well, when I first started showing these, nobody knew. And it didn't have the music and stuff on it. They were just frames with a landscape or a seascape in it. And oh my goodness, a famous critic showed up at my show and he really liked the work. He spent a lot of time going picture to picture, all that stuff, and he left not knowing that it was an illusionistic deal. He thought they were just beautiful frames on top of this kind of thing. And I had been involved with it long enough that I didn't realize that everyone wouldn't know that. But people don't know things. So, as my work developed, I'll use the word developed, to the point where I had to be able to paint something that was at least pretty much like a photograph. Otherwise, this doesn't work. If you're going to do a trompe-l'oeil frame, it has to be something that you'll pick around on. Otherwise, it doesn't work. I'm taking a painting to Greece, painting this size. It has to be uncrated to go through customs. The customs people kept picking at it and saying, but you got to take the painting out. You might have drugs back there. And they kept picking at it. People just won't believe something until they get a little bit accustomed to it. So anyhow, trying to paint this realistic stuff, that is not easy for me at all, at all. In fact, it's so unnatural for me that I knew I had to do it. I shut down my loft where I've been painting for 2 years. Did not permit anyone to see what I was up to. And my dealer's around the corner. He's only maybe 100 paces from where I am, and he's going nuts. What the heck's going on up there? That kind of a deal. Just working, Louis. I can't show you this stuff. Anyhow, so I am working away every day, full day's work, doing this. Finally, one day, I get a piece, and it's pretty neat, I think. My God, I've actually done it. I've taught myself to paint realistically. So I call my friend Don Eddy. He's one of the first and best of the photorealists. And I got to tell you, these characters are good. It's breathtaking what they do. In fact, it's not believable what they do. So I thought, well, Don's an old and good friend. I'll let him see it. And I was so damn proud when I called him up. I said, you gotta come see this. You gotta come see this. So he comes over immediately. And he looks at the picture. He looks again, and then he turns to me. And he says, you must never, ever let this painting out of the studio. You must show it to no one. If you do, your career will be over. And he was deadly serious. He was worried. He had saved me from a career-ending move 20 years earlier. So I believed him on that. So I went back to work. I'll tell you about the career-ending thing later. It's kind of a good story, almost. But, so I went back to work, working, and finally got to where I could do this. Now, once I could do that, then I could start making pictures again. Then, the picture, after it's made in the frame, all of this little gold stuff and these floaters and this business, metaphorically, I would refer to that as the music. And that is metaphor, this and that. And oh, this is cool, Henry. You don't know this, I don't think. But Henry, do you know Henry Sayer? He's our most adventurous and foremost art historian. And he's in Oregon. Now imagine that. That's the damnedest thing, Henry, when you think about it. But he has one of my big pictures in a book of his with the gold things on top of it that I'm referring to as the music. Well, one day, if you're painting, you're shut up. Your mind can go any place you want because you're not thinking your pictures out. So you can think about anything, and I'm thinking about what if what I'm referring to as the music, metaphorically, actually is musical notation from Mars. Or wherever, some other culture. What if somebody showed up and could play that? Not play the mood that the picture suggested. Not that at all. Looked at this stuff and actually played it. And I have friends who are musicians. Tried to talk them into that. And they were very reluctant. Very reluctant. And then I realized their reluctance was a good thing. Because if you're trained in music, you're going to start making an equivalency someplace, and you're going to actually start playing a version of what you would play were it to be regular notation. So I realized the only person who could do this was somebody who was not trained in music, who could not play a musical instrument, and was completely without talent or ability. That's me. So it was really, I have a keyboard that I use to keep my hands limber, that's true, that kind of thing. So I pound around with it. So I ended up playing a piece that turned out to be exactly 11 minutes long. And I'd play it, and I would play it, and I'd look and say, you know, maybe that's not that terrible. Well, you know how you are. If you've got a big ego, you know, you're going to think something's a lot better than it really is. You need to be taken down a peg or two. So I would have some of my friends over, some of which were musicians, and we would sit in front of the picture. So there might only be 8 people in chairs close to the picture, and I'd tell them what's going down. It's 11 minutes long, and you sit there. Well, what happened was so cool. They all sat in front of the picture and watched it for 11 minutes. And I could tell because I was sitting in the back making damn certain they didn't wander off with their eyes. And the thing that was so cool at the end, it wasn't that I was patted on the back for having invented new music. What they said to a person, they said, I never realized the beauty or complexity of this picture. And I've never looked at a picture for that long in a row. So that's the purpose of this music I got. I still trick people in to watching a picture for 11 minutes or so. I'm thinking, Daniel, I understand why this could never be, but a museum, what if you had about 20 chairs with wheels so you could be darting around here and there, and it would permit someone to scoot up right to a painting and then just sit there and look and watch it over and over again. Problem is, you don't even have to tell me, teenagers would come in and they'd have drag races with these chairs, and they'd be bouncing off the walls. There's problems with that, I understand. But how about for the donors to the museum? A featured evening. You don't serve wine on that evening, but you permit the use of these chairs.
I'll look into that.
I really do that, and if you do, I'll be happy to come down and talk.
Excellent.
as to lead this off. So, one thing, I'm going to leave you with one story, and the story is kind of a neat story because it shows you about the intensity of youth and competition in the art world in New York City, all at once. So, on the eve of my first exhibition at the gallery that's representing me, and to have a show, it's a big, big deal. I worked for several years going around, trying to get a gallery. A lot of sad stories. But, so all the work is up, and what they do in New York was prior to the opening of a show, they will have over their main collectors, and that might only be 3 or 4 people, because those 3 or 4 people can set the scene for other people. They're kind of like the first adapters, that kind of thing. So here we are at the gallery, and I'm talking to this guy, who's their main guy, about my work, and he's damned interested in it. He's, you know how people are. And I was thrilled with this. Then, what should happen but the most ordinary thing in the world? My dealer's wife came up and started chatting with us. Now, who doesn't do that? I mean, that's a normal thing, right? Except she started talking about this great Chinese restaurant that they discovered. And I'll tell you, I just flipped out in my head. I thought, God damn it, I can't permit this, to have my work disrespected like that. To me, it was a church. And here they're talking about a Chinese restaurant. I went crazy in my mind, but I had the presence of mind to simply leave. As I'm walking back to my loft, I'm thinking, I can't have my work exhibited at a place that disrespects it to that extent. Now, sounding crazy to you, isn't it? Can any of you get with me and say, oh yeah, I can see how that'd be? None of you can, right?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, then you should be dragged off yourself. Anyhow, so finally I'm going through, what can I do? I'm an honest person and I've committed to this show. I can't pull my work out. That would be, well, that's completely unethical and dishonest. You have to stand by your commitments. So I had to put the work up, but what am I going to do? Finally, it hits me. The perfect solution. I will have to go to the gallery the next day and slice up the paintings. Leave them on the wall, but cut them up. And I slept well that night because I realized what had to be done and how it could be done. Well, happily, again, my friend Don Eddy. Now, Don Eddy'd been famous for, I'm thinking maybe 10 years. He knew the art world way better than I. And he counseled me. He said, why don't you just give it a day? Don't go slashing them up right away. Give it a day. See what happens. And so I did. And the next day, the Guggenheim Museum came in, bought a giant piece, and all kinds of stuff started to happen. I mean, but you think about that. Every so often, you got an angel in your group of friends. And as I think back on it, I'm telling you guys this story, not because I'm proud of my stupidity, but to give an idea of the intensity of what the New York art world is like, because I was not by far the most intense person. Another example, drugs, cocaine all over the damn place in the city. And we're 16,000 artists in about 4 square blocks, couple hundred galleries, that kind of density. The competition going great blazes. And we hear about Joe Schmo does an overdose. And there isn't any, oh, poor Joe Schmo. No, it was just one less guy we have to compete against. You can imagine the brutality of that kind of thinking. Anyhow.
Do you want to take one question, then
Sure.
wrap up the recording part of
Good.
the tour, and then we'll have time to mingle.
This is recorded? This is so weird. You know what I consider this malpractice? Okay. So.
Just don't slash this one.
Who's got the best question for George? It's too much pressure now. I see a hand over there.
Yes.
What was your childhood?
Oh, by God, that's a good question. No, I'm not kidding you. It's something I should have mentioned. Childhood life. My father's in Italy during World War II. He doesn't see me for 3 years, nor I him. I mean, I was born when he was gone. So my male role model was my grandfather. My grandfather was a really interesting guy. His hobby was boxing and drawing in equal portions. He thought everyone needed to know how to box and how to draw. And he wasn't kidding. My mom and my aunt knew how to box as well as draw. That's the beginning of my childhood, followed by a series of, just one aspect of it. We'll play this one through. All I cared about growing up was playing sports and looking at pictures, making them, period. Crappiest student ever to come down the pike was me. That's all that I cared about. But so we'd visit my grandparents frequently. And every time we'd visit them, my brother and I, and my brother's here someplace, I think he'll remember this. We'd walk up the path and our grandfather would come out and greet us, snap us into a headlock, raise us off the ground, and give us a vicious Dutch rub. Then he would show us some move, and he'd say, now, this is the way to get a man down. And once you get a man down, you never let him up. Then we'd go into a studio and look at pictures. I'm telling you a true thing here. When I got to be an art student, I thought it was a contact sport. Anyway, that's one aspect of my childhood. Oh, Last thing about that story. His advice to me was always, draw big and put some action in. That was his advice until he dropped dead. I'm in Paris, about 10 years after he drops dead. And I'm, it's kind of a fellowship deal. I'm doing these giant drawings. And there's so damn much action in them that you couldn't be in the room without supervision. I mean, they're jumping all over the place. And I got to thinking, my God, my grandfather's advice coming home. That's the end of the story. There we go.
Thanks again, everyone. And you'll come back and join us on March 2nd. On that Saturday, we'll have a gallery tour with 4 artists talking about landscape and the environment and the influences they draw from working with that material. But thank you to all of our artists who are here today. And I don't know if you mentioned that Henry Sayre also wrote the essay for our exhibition catalog, too. So we're so appreciative to have his perspective in that book. And yeah, thanks again.